all who come to this happy place, welcome. Here age relives fond memories of the past, and here youth may savor the challenge and promise of the future.
Right now, you're listening to a documentary podcast devoted to the unauthorized, uncensored, and untold stories of Disney films and television, fondly remembered and often forgotten. Welcome to Disney Dust. Welcome to our two-part series on Benji. In our last episode, Benji had passed away, leaving Frank In and Joe Camp to find a new dog and new movies to make. If you were wondering if Joe Camp could possibly have more stories after an hour-and-a-half episode, well, of course he does. He's Joe Camp. And so, we pick up with Joe on the continuing story of Benji.
Most of the investments into the second movie were not in the first movie. And there were a lot of people, a lot of investors in the first movie who said, no, I got mine. I'm happy. I'm not going to go again. And there were a few, but not as many as one might expect, to do that. But we did. I guess the prime motivation for it was the second movie that we did was a movie called Humps, and it was a comedy about the time in American history when the cavalry was actually trying out camels in the desert of Texas and Arizona in an attempt to find a better way to cross the desert and explore and do the things that whatever they were doing. And so we decided that would make a fun basis for a movie, and we were on the set of Humps. And Frank had 7 or 8 little bitty puppies out on the set all the time. Frank was there because he was the overseer. There were no dogs in the movie, but he was the overseer of all the camels and horses and stuff, and it set up all the people and so forth. And so he had all 7 or 8 of these puppies sitting on little small fruit baskets, not the bushel basket, but the little small ones, and doing stuff every day when we were out on the set on the old fort in Humps. And one of those dogs transitioned into the next Benji. And as soon as we started promotional work on the new movie, we never went out with a big announcement. Said, hey, it's a new Benji. We just answered questions honestly. Is this the same Benji that was in this? No. This is Benji's daughter. Frank always swore that it was Benji's daughter. I don't think it was, but he always swore that it was. But so she went down with that. She had that legacy that she was Benji's daughter all the way through it. And we made it, and in the southeast and southwest, it did better numbers than Benji. But in the northeast, all the way down, you can draw an X, from the southeast all the way up to Washington, and it was all good along that line, and from New York down to California, it was all terrible. I mean, absolutely terrible. So we kind of went running back to trying to find something, a follow-up for Benji. I don't really recall where the script idea came from, but we were trying to keep things interesting and keep things unique and different and so forth. And unlike the first movie, which was Benji doing something for somebody else. This one was being revolved around him being basically, kidnapped and held in an international spy ring kind of thing. And that was the MacGuffin, if you will. It wasn't the story, but the story I deemed to be already one notch less than the first one, because in this one, everything that Benji was doing was to save his own hide, so to speak. And so that doesn't have the same emotional grasp that somebody is, giving it all for somebody else. And so I knew that, was the case. And so we decided to set it somewhere where you immediately felt lost and alone. And so we had a string of locations we were going to go look at. And we went from Paris to somewhere, and then to Greece, and then we were going to hop over the Mediterranean to some of the more eerie kinds of countries and settings. And when we landed in Athens, the first thing we saw were a bunch of people walking around with machine guns slung over their shoulder in uniform. And then as soon as we got out on the streets, suddenly realized for the first time that the entire alphabet has been taken away from you. If you go to Spain or to Mexico or Italy or France, you can kind of get by on, like I've taken Spanish 2 or 3 times in school and didn't care anything in the world about the language, but I had been there, and you can put things together on street signs, or at least you can read them and match them up to a map and things like that. But over there, it's a whole new ball game, because the alphabet is not the same as ours, and they're all weird looking and so forth. And so I figured that this was about as lost and alone as I wanted to feel for a while. So that's where we landed to do the movie. And it was an interesting experience, because we had a really highly mixed team. We had a bunch from the States, had some from London, had some Greek, and one Irish guy on the crew. And so it was interesting working, with all those kinds of people and so forth, and still trying to do what we did in the first one, and that is put Benji at the heart of the whole thing and have him, in effect, acting and expressing his emotions as to what's going on, and how much we care for him, and trying to figure out how he fits into this whole puzzle. In a nutshell, that's kind of how it all came to be. We scouted a couple of islands and Athens and a couple of smaller towns around, and wound up deciding that most of the shooting was going to be done in Athens and some around the harbor, but a lot in what they call the Plaka. It's their old town. It was like walking on a set, that had been very carefully color managed to take you through the ages of how long those little buildings and so forth had been sitting there. And it was really gorgeous. And so I said, this can't hurt a thing. Let's do everything we can within the Plaka, so that if anybody gets tired of looking at the dog, they can look at the scenery. And that's about what it came down to. I mean, everywhere you look, you could be shooting something, and it'd be great, just because it was so authentic. I mean, the concept was, because we were moving very quickly, unfortunately, because we were making a decision late in the day that we wanted to do this after the Humps release. and it didn't have the time and care and feeding that the original had, and we were going to have to, jump some short fences and things along the way, and so knowing that, we were making some decisions that I would probably have rather not made in some instances, so that I could absorb the whole thing and work out the plot details and really make it feel like it, that we had landed in Greece. I wrote the script over there on the island of Rhodes. I was there by myself with, IBM Selectric in those days, and I'd go down to a particular taverna almost every night to eat, and got to be real good friends with one of the waiters there, and he was teaching me the language more or less as we went along each night. And if I had script questions about, what would a Greek do, or how do you say this in Greek and so forth, I would take them with me there at night and meet with my waiter and try to figure it out. And he was great. He took me out one night after he got off at this restaurant, which was like 11 o'clock, and that's when Greece kind of turns on, and all the throwing of plates and so forth that you've heard about is all true. It's trying to shoot sound down in the Plaka early on the morning after almost any night. We were fighting when we got into sound. We were fighting the garbage trucks that were going around and crushing all the plates that had come out into the garbage at night, and it would ring through the Plaka just like echoes. And so that was indeed fun. But the idea I was trying to get to was really absorb it so that it came out. The time in Greece came out as an experience of the real deal. I wanted a very quick way to establish that unwillingly and quite accidentally, as far as he's concerned, Benji got involved in this international something or another and had no choice about what was happening to him, and managed to escape when he got to Greece. He was being shipped over to Greece as part of the trip that the family was taking, and the plane stopped in Athens before going on to the island where they were going to have a vacation. While in the luggage room, he managed to escape and was out before it was over with. The chase was over with. He was out in the center of Athens, lost and alone, and couldn't read the signs. But it had the feel that we were looking for. And I think I actually had the old IBM Selectric had the ball on the top that there was where all the type was. And every time you'd hit a key, it'd spin to that letter and snap it in place. And I actually had a Greek ball with me as well, and all of the Greek lines in the movie were actually written in Greek in the screenplay. So, and what I wanted out of that was that I did not want the people to get, the viewers to get anything other than a hint of what's going on, and so anything that was said by the Greek agents or whatever they were, was in Greek, and we had no clue what they were saying, and it was either not important or it was important enough that I didn't want it to bleed through, and that's why we did no translations of any kind in doing that. And I would write it and then get it checked out by my waiter down there and see if it should be, and go from there.
Benji, the world's most huggable hero, returns in For the Love of Benji. When a scientist goes missing, why is Benji wanted by international thieves? Secret agents.
How about say goodbye to your dog?
A man posing as CIA.
I work for the United States government.
And a psychotic dog.
Benji is the key to a very important situation.
Benji's a spy?
Find out in this unforgettable adventure of excitement, suspense, and intrigue.
The whole thing sounds like a James Bond movie. Benji!
A family film by Joe Camp.
Far out! Benji's the spy. He is not a spy.
This one did approximately 50% domestically of what the first one did. And it, you know, we learned as we went along and later that we probably should feel very fortunate about that, because there was a movie out there that was scooping up most of the box office dollars available that summer. What was in 77? That's right. Star Wars. We were satisfied. You know, well, I would say we were delighted, but we were satisfied that it did it, and it was in the top 20. The first, I think it's 3 of the Benji movies, and it's Benji for the Love of Benji and Benji the Hunted, were in the top 10% of grosses for the year from all movies. So that, you know, we were relatively happy about, you know, the way things were going. Benji had become, by that time, pretty much an international object that everybody knew, which, you know, was certainly a good feeling to me that I could walk onto a street corner virtually anywhere in the free world and say one word and bring a smile and happy sparkle to the eyes of people in virtually any you know, free country that was out there.
Chevy Chase is Benjamin Browning, a struggling private eye who's about to embark on the strangest case of his career.
What can I do for you?
I want to buy protection for someone, and I know you'll be discreet.
But before he can track down the clues, the witnesses, the evidence, or the suspects, there's some good news and some bad news. The good news is
Call me on Friday.
he's going to make a date.
Call you Friday.
The bad news is he's going to be late.
Now, if you just sign here,
What am I signing?
you're acknowledging that you are dead and you agree to all the terms and conditions thereof.
But incredibly enough, there's more news.
Final assessment assignment is to go back and solve your own murder.
Go back. Excuse me. Wait a minute. Those are animals. I'm not going back as an animal.
And now,
Hello?
he's back.
Maybe you remember me. I was killed here.
Somewhat shorter,
I need a clue.
but wiser.
And a pair of hands.
With 48 wild and woolly hours to solve his own murder or die again trying. 20th Century Fox presents
I'm sorry, Mr. Browning. I didn't mean to startle you.
Chevy Chase.
Why don't you stand up?
I am standing up.
Jane Seymour.
How about if I just call you BJ for short?
You're asking for it.
Omar Sharif.
Come here.
Sorry, I gotta be running along here. Oh, you're strangling me.
Robert Morley. And Benji.
Hello. I gotta run. Turn the lights off when you leave.
In an adult tale of murder, mystery, and forbidden love.
I don't like being cute. I don't like being fluffy. I want some hands.
Oh, Heavenly Dog.
The original financing for that movie, Oh Heavenly Dog, was to come from a German tax shelter, because there were certain things in the German tax system that made movie investment, rather cool. So it was without a studio or anything involved. It was just this German tax shelter that somebody had found for us, and we went over there and made a deal. Then when we were back to actually read the final draft and sign it and all that kind of stuff, we were told that we would have to provide 2 different sets of books on financing for the movie. I was aghast and said, well, what are you talking about? He said, we got to have one set for blah blah and one set for blee blee. And what it came down to when I was tore it apart enough was that they wanted to falsify the actual books for some segment of the investing group to make them believe something that wasn't really true. So I pulled our attorney aside and I said, "Do you know anybody in Hollywood? And any of the studio people or ones that are in New York or anything?" Because by this time we were well into pre-production on the movie because we thought everything was a go, and so and it was going to be shot over there in, I think, in London and in Germany. What happened with the money is we just walked away, and our attorney found somebody that he knew at Fox, and come to find out, it was later, but not a whole lot later, that the people who were running Fox at that time had, and were doing a really, really good job, had just went out and started their own thing with Alan Ladd Jr. And Fox was left with nobody in all the important executive roles. So what they did is they went over to Columbia and hired replacements. In other words, they just picked up the whole production department, I think, and moved it over to Fox to take the place of all those who had left with Alan Ladd. And Columbia had already turned down Oh Heavenly Dog in script form. So that's how it wound up. The people who were now responsible for the distribution of the picture had already turned the thing down, and they wanted all of Fox's product off the table so that they could be judged on their own things that they approved for production and going. So they had little or no interest in anything that was being released that was old Fox before they came over. And so we got caught in that mess too. And so how much of it could have changed into something that was worthwhile, box office-wise, if everything had sailed through with the original Alan Ladd group at Fox, nobody knows. And I have no idea either. It happens to be my least favorite of all the movies, though, for lots of little bitty reasons. I mean, I think it's still a very clever concept and an interesting one, and it got some pretty good reviews, but I'm not a big fan of it. And we wanted a big star who would get paid a bunch of money and only have to work a couple of weeks for it, because he was on camera so little that most of his work was done in a sound studio, just spitting them out one after the other. And my original choice for the thing was Burt Reynolds, and I can't truly tell you why, except he was right at his peak of all the movies that he did, and was a funny guy and it seemed to really work for me. We could not get a hold of him through the agent, or we were told that it was a turn down, but found out that it had not been presented. And so we finally we were trolling around to see what else might be possible, and Chevy Chase's name came up, and we ran a check on it, and they took the script, looked at it, so they liked it and liked the money, so boom, that was done. Literally 3 or 4 days later, we had gone to Cannes with Benji and some press people and whatnot, and made the rounds at the Cannes Film Festival and introducing people to Benji and to the movie and the concept and so forth. Again, getting foreign distribution, which would contribute to the budget of the film. And in the course of doing that, Burt Reynolds and Sally Field were together, and I asked our press person if she could set this up, and she found out that Sally Fields was being interviewed in it looked like a ballroom. It was a huge room, and she was going to be sitting in a chair in the middle of the floor, in the middle of the room, and one of the, somebody from some media outlet was going to be doing an interview for her, a print interview, obviously, because it may have been recorded audio, but it was not shot with video. And so what we set up was Benji taking the script to Sally Field in the middle of this interview, interrupting it, no doubt, for sure, and with a note on the very front cover of the thing that very quickly explained that we've been trying to get this script to Burt for some time, and they keep telling us that it's turned down, but we found out from the inside that it had never been delivered. Would you please give this to him? Or words to that effect. And she got a kick out of it. She laughed and, put the script in her valise or whatever, and we went on about our business. And to her, it was all a fun joke. And we, of course, waited and waited and waited, by the phone till the wee hours of every night. And there was never a phone call. It was like the day after, or the day, 2 days after the Chevy Chase deal was verbally closed, I get a phone call, and the secretary says, Burt Reynolds is on the phone. And when I realized that she was telling the truth, and it just went, and anyway, he got on the phone, or was on the phone, and said, Sally gave me this script, and I finally got to read it. I love it. I'd love to do the project. And I just wanted to go stick my head through a wall somewhere. Because I still would have preferred at that point in time, to have him do it than Chevy Chase. And I told him, I said, well, we've got a deal with somebody else because we never heard. And we tried earlier and blah, blah, blah. I told him the whole story and everything. And so I know we've passed each other somewhere once or twice since then and say hello and remember and keep going. But it's really funny the way those things work out sometimes. And I was really upset, and I wasn't even sure that Sally Field would give it to him because we didn't know her from anybody, and so sure enough she did. But anyway, that's the way it wound up. I think we poured our best work for the kind of budget that we had to work with into making it the picture that was written and approved, basically. And I don't know. I don't know whether it was the putting of the voice coming from Benji's head in it, or what. It's just, it doesn't work for me as well as I would like to have that much work for me. It certainly didn't do well, and part of that reason is because the Columbia troupe over at Fox were moving on, and they didn't care about what was left over for them when the Fox team left. Obviously, with the box office, that thing did. There was a lot more problems than just that, and whether it just didn't grab the. I mean, it was not based on anything Benji, and so I was kind of a fish out of water, probably also, because the elements that made the elements that that put this one together are not the elements that made everybody love Benji in the first place. And so many times the sequel is never as good as the original, because the original is where the wonder of the imagination came from, and now we're trying to replicate it in some form that keeps everybody entertained and interesting without duplicating it per se, and that's never a good place to start, I don't think. And it is part and parcel of why we took Benji out of the hometown atmosphere ultimately, and we made Benji. We undercut everything with Benji as a personality, not Benji the movie number 2 or 3 or 4, and the kids are growing up and the this and the that. They were all like Benji is a personality and an actor, and sometimes he's making movies, and sometimes he's out fishing on the Pacific.
Every now and then there comes a star who melts even the hardest heart, a hero who charms children of all ages. Walt Disney has brought back to us one such star, a canine hero whose adventures in the wilderness make up an epic story, Benji in The Hunted.
From deep in the hostile wilderness, Walt Disney Pictures presents an incredible motion picture adventure, The Hunted. Lost and alone, a courageous dog must fight for survival and for the lives of 4 cougar cubs. It's a story of courage and heroism, of heart-pounding suspense, and heartwarming tenderness. Now, Walt Disney Pictures invites you to share the excitement, the triumph, and the pure fun as Benji, the canine superstar, leaps into action. There's no better time than now to experience the unbelievable magic of Walt Disney Pictures' all-new adventure epic, The Hunted.
Benji the Hunted is a very unique picture with, I think there's only human bodies in sight or sound for less than 5 minutes of the entire movie. It's all animals, and we weren't working with Disney until the last minute. That picture was funded just like all the rest of them privately, and was made privately by produced by Mulberry Square under a partnership that raised the money, and it was a really unique picture that taught me a lot, and I think I've been able to pass some of it on. Is that money, I think with almost no exception, money should be used to buy time, not expanse. Because only when the people who are doing the work and telling the story have the time to really do it well, is it going to work? And you can't cover it up. And I think that's part of maybe my problem with Oh Heavenly Dog, is that a lot of the stuff that took place in that movie could have used a lot more time. And we had a limited budget, and we had to make it work within the budget we had. And on Benji the Hunted, Benji the Hunted, we had a limited budget and not a very big one. But when things started, because there were no humans in the picture and no dialogue in the picture, there were only animals, and you could arrange them in a way, the shooting in a way that allowed us to drop the size of the crew progressively as we got into the last month. Every movie that we've made has been roughly 3 months in production time, of actually shooting time. Benji the Hunted was 4 months, and yet we were able to still bring it in under budget by manipulation of the crew, the quantity of the crew, so that we would have the time necessary. And we were working with baby cubs mostly, or heavily, during that month, and a lot of very, very important stuff with the cubs and the mother. And it wasn't the real mother, and that's something you don't do in Cougar Land. Put somebody else's babies with a real mother, apparently. And anyway, we were really able to get down to minutia work, like on working with the cubs in and around the nest where Benji found them in the first place, and eliminate, because with the cubs we eliminated a whole ton of trainers. We had a bear trainer, and we had the baby cougar trainer. We had the cougar trainer. At one time, I think we had over 12 trainers on the set. Often, most of them working at the same time. And it had all this is, I'll take 12 actors any day over 12 trainers. Because they scream and holler, how can I make my dog do this when you yelling at your bear, or something. And it was, you stand back and look at it, it was probably hysterical, but it was a fight, all the way. And there were numerous shots where Benji was in the same scene as a wolf or a cougar or a bear. There was one scene where Benji was in the same scene with the bear and a wolf. Well, all the same shot. And we minimized those so that they would bridge the gaps of shots with, that were basically cutaways, so that it all played and nobody ever questioned it. It worked very nicely, but we had to have some of those with, the animals in question actually in the same shot to make it believable and to make it really work. And so we had a bunch of good trainers. I don't fault them any for the issues that we had going through the training, the shooting process, but it did take a lot longer than I anticipated, because I foolishly said, okay, we get movies done in 90 days, and there you go. That's what it's going to be. And I was wrong. Only 25% off, or 33 1/3, I guess, percent off. as it turns out through the years, I can pretty straightforwardly say that Frank was willing to try anything as long as he had the proper protection and ability to protect, the dog, and not have the dog or himself or anybody else in any kind of a danger situation. And so it's a matter of just working it out. How are we going to do it? There's a shot in Benji the Hunted at the very end when Benji has finally gotten the solution to how he shows this lion, mountain lion, why he's been following her all this time and trying to get her attention and being chased by her and everything else. And he's got Mama coming out of the woods, and he has just gotten all of her cubs, or her cubs to be, lined up on top of this mountain. And Mama comes out of the woods, takes a long look, turns around, and goes back into the woods. And we're back on Benji, just ripped out of his mind because, this is his last shot to get her to take over these babies and do what should be done with them, which he can't really do. And the shot of Benji looking after her going into the woods is a terrific emotional shot. And then you go into the woods, and Mama stops about 10 yards into the woods, looks kind of over her shoulder, looks back at her own one baby that has been following her around, turns and walks back out into the clearing, and just keeps walking. The cubs are beyond where Benji is standing, and she just keeps walking. She gets right to Benji. 1 foot away from him, and stops and turns and looks him in the eye. And there's this moment where she says, "I got it." There's this emotion you were talking about yesterday. But in that moment, you knew that she got it, she understood, and she was going to take care of it. And we had to have that moment there, and they were literally, it's a really tight shot, but they were literally 1.5 feet away from each other. And it was the most childlike of the cougars that we were using. She was very playful, and I never saw her do anything aggressive at all. But there was still this enormous tension and fear. And there were 6 people, including me, who had our hands right near Benji, where I was ready to grab behind her haunches, if necessary. And I had people ahead of me. They were aiming for shoulders and this and that, and she was going to be out of there. And the cue was to watch the cougar's eyes. And as long as they were soft, don't relax, but everything, is going to be okay. And then the cougar is called off of the shot and walks over to where the cubs are all lying and lays down and lets them nurse. But there were people everywhere, both on the cougar trainer's side and because it was, like I said, it was a very close shot. We weren't touching the animal while that moment was happening because that would have been distracting to either one of them. But we were inches from being able to, if her eyes ever focused, if they ever got that, you've seen cats do it, and immediately that that's not a good sign for whatever's coming up. And but to be able to get stuff like that is what really, I think paid the whole movie off.
Joe Camp was inspired by a Disney film when he was a child. Now he was making one. And for a moment, it meant the world to him.
Yeah, I allowed myself that, and it was, it was a special thing, but it was just a benchmark there, because what it turned out as is the reason Disney came after us to release that movie, and they flew down to Dallas and looked at rough cuts and a whole wad of them, and that's when Katzenberg was there, and he was in Dallas at least once, and with the team checking, and then I got to know him fairly well when we were out there in post-production and so forth, and it they came wanting to see the movie, and did, and made an offer for distribution, and it was negotiated, and what we had was we had a 3-partner general partnership that raised the money for the film in a limited partnership of investors, and so it's like a subsidiary or something, and the 3 people that were in charge of the whole thing was myself and our chief investor from the original movie and his chief donor from the original movie, and when it all came down, what we found out, and we never got them to fully admit it, but we did find out from inside, the reason that they were so hot to get Benji is it was a good film. It was a good Disney-worthy film, and they had an open slot because one of the movies they had set up for their 3-movie release during the summer didn't get finished quickly enough, and they saw that coming, and so they needed to fill a slot. So it wasn't like, we love you dearly, so come be with us. It was, we have a financial problem over here, and we would like to use it up. And we did find out, could get confirmed that was true later. Didn't, so I was kind of on the fence about it all, and I voted against doing it. When it came down to, we were on this one guy's private plane. One of the investors' private planes had gone out to meet with Katzenberg and the rest of the troops and whatnot and get the final offer. And on the plane coming back, we voted, and I voted against it. But I lost. And the other 2 were thinking of their investors. And, well, I heard 47 times, this is the best family film distributor in the world. This is a great message to take back to the investors. They're going to love it for that. And I don't know if I said it then or later or what, but my feeling all along was no, that's not the case. The case is that this is not their movie. They don't own 100% of it. They're not going to put the time and effort into it they would if it was their own product. It's just a placeholder to get them through the summer and on into next year where it'll all be their movies, kind of thing. And so that's why I voted no, even though there was definitely an emotional connection with it all. And I got to be really good friends with their head of distribution during all of this, and he was a really nice person. So it was not a bad experience, and we wound up still. I think I told you before that 3 of the movies were in the top 10% of grosses for the year, of all grosses for the year, and Benji the Hunted was one of them, and Disney helped be responsible say that they did a bad job distributing it, but they didn't approach it the way I felt like they should have.
After Benji the Hunted, there wouldn't be another Benji film for another 17 years.
The primary reason is that my wife Carolyn, who by this time was running the company, was the production manager of Benji the Hunted and a producer of Benji the Hunted, and wound up being the first assistant director of Benji the Hunted. And she was doing all this while raising two kids, and one of them was working on the movie. And when we went over time-wise, we were supposed to be done around, sometime in early September. We wound up finishing in early October. And at one point, she had to go back home because Brandon had to be back in school, and he was working on the show. And her workload was just incredible, and the stress level had to be incredible. We were working in the mountains of Washington and Oregon and crossing the Columbia River to get to the top of a mountain over there that we were using to shoot at, and there was no way to do it except with helicopters, and we had to, lift bears and cougars and whatever via helicopter to the top of this mountain to get the shots with, the other famous mountains in Washington in the background and whatnot. Like I say, the stress load on her had to be enormous, and I came to the realization later that she was working like it was her dream, but it wasn't. It was mine. And there's something that happens when you're working for your own passion. You can go forever. If you really are passionate about it and you really are on it and know what's going to make it work, you have a lot more energy and a lot less stress because you're going for your dream. When you're going for somebody else's, it's never going to have the same energy, and so thus the stress takes over. At least that's my feeling about it all, because she came out shortly after the return on that movie and had a massive stroke. They operated to relieve the pressure in the head, and she was without. They left the plate out where they went in. She was without that for. She came very close to. The doctor told us later that she was very close to going if they couldn't get in there and get the pressure off of it, and they did, and she was in extreme care for 30 days maybe. A long time. She finally started coming back, and we decided after that, it took her a year and a half to get fully through physical therapy and back to roughly 95%. And so we decided then and there that we were going to put Benji, if we could find the right partner, into a partnership whereby they would do the work, either raising money or making studio deals or whatever it took, and then we'd come out and get involved in the production end of it and shoot, and edit, and help promote as was needed. And we did, and the good side of that coin is we had 9 of the best years that we had had. Basically keeping up with what was going on somewhat, and keeping up with the library of Benji, and as times changed and how it could be done and used and so forth, but no production whatsoever during that period. and it it was really good for us. And at the end of that 9 years, she had a sudden cardiac arrest, one of those, bam, stops beating right then, and died. And while I was in the airport at LAX in Los Angeles, coming home, and it was probably the worst year I ever spent. It was the year after that. And I finally came to the realization, I knew it all along, but I finally decided to do something about the fact that this partner we had not done enough due diligence on, and the partner had accomplished absolutely nothing during that 9-10 year period, and that I needed to do something about that and not leave. That was in my mind, I guess. I didn't want to leave, this mess to my boys, so I went in and tried to do some settling with him, and he was not about to settle on anything. It was a joint venture partnership, and he didn't want out. He had not done anything, and he had not accomplished anything. We hadn't done any production. So we wound up in a massive legal battle. And a friend of his told me at one point, right in the middle of it all, he said, I just want to tell you this because he told me this, and I hate to see you get into too deep here, but he said he knows he's got more money and time than you do, and he's going to use that to suck you as dry as you possibly can before any kind of a verdict of it all comes down. He, unfortunately, I guess for him, didn't know me well enough, which may be part of the problem. But we went into the forced arbitration that our agreement called for, and he kept trying to go outside of that agreement and sue me, sue the company, and do all the kind of things that will cost more and more and more legally. The bottom line, when it was all said and done, we got it swept into the one event of what's going to happen to this partnership, and we got everything back, and won with a very small settlement, and went on about our way. But one of the attorneys who he sued me one time in the course of all of this, and that personal suit triggered some liability insurance. So our attorney contacted the insurance company that had that insurance and told them what the situation was, and they said, oops, we better get somebody on the case. And so they hired a law firm down in Orange County in Los Angeles. I was out for this session and the trial, as it were, and so forth. And they sent an attorney up to represent them, to find out what was going on. Do they need to get involved and split out their part of this, or do they need to just get on the train with anybody else that's in it, because the issues are all the same? And they chose to send the attorney up and observe for a while, and then probably not bifurcate, which would be just making it twice as bad to do that. And that attorney was a woman who is now my wife. And it's hard to believe that I've had the blessing to be in love with two incredibly bright, handsome, compassionate people in my lifetime, and I have with both. guess, after that trial. Kathleen and I were married in Pawleys Island, South Carolina.
After the trial, Joe would make another Benji film, Benji Off the Leash, in 2004, 30 years after the original Benji. The next entry would be 14 years later, with Benji in 2018, although this time it would be directed by Brandon Camp, Joe's son.
It was easy because it started at a really great place. It was him coming to me saying, I think it's time, I think we need to do this, and I would like to. And he's never been one. He's been an A-list writer out there for a long time, and he directed Love Happens, and co-wrote and directed Love Happens, and has sold a bunch of A-list scripts, and he directed one other thing. I forgot what it was. And so to come and say, I want to carry the flag forward, was great. And so he kind of put me in the right mood to say, yeah, go for it. And I read the script and then read a little later version of it, and probably had a little impact on it, but not much. And did a really good job with it. And, it took him he was involved with 3 different studios before finally getting it together, and he put the whole deal together and everything. So and we went down on the set when they were shooting. It was shot in New Orleans, and we went down there and spent 3 days on set, soaking up the wonderful people that he had put together, because a lot of them would come up to me and say, the reason I'm a sound engineer in the movies is because of Benji. And I didn't ask him how that related, but it was really neat to hear. He had a big crew of Benji fans, which was good, because that means that they're going to care more about it.
However, there was one more tragedy that Joe Camp had to endure. And although it happened in 2002, it will stay with Joe Camp forever.
Not long before he passed, he was in the hospital, and I was in L.A. for something. I don't know what, and I knew that he was back in the hospital. He had diabetes. He would not lose weight. It always infuriated me that I was pretty convinced that if he dropped down to the vicinity of 200, and I know he could do it because on Humps, he and the crew had a pot. Everybody put in $100 or something in this pot, and whoever lost the most weight by the end of production got the pot. And I told everybody there, I said, Joe, you in the pot? I said, are you crazy? He could lose one of me and never miss it. Not a chance. And so I didn't get in the pot. But sure enough, Frank, I think he was down around 200 from 350 at least. And it showed that he absolutely could, and he went around bragging about it all the time, how many loops in his, or holes in his belt he had pulled in, and etc. But it just didn't stick. He always said the reason was there's no food I don't like. That's my problem. And I talked to him about it on several occasions, tried, and it was just part of him, and I think he would rather be him and be remembered that way than try to change and be miserable because he couldn't eat anything. And Juanita would walk around. She had a bottle of, and always there, a bottle of Tabasco in her purse, and numerous other little things that he always wanted on his food. He'd put the Tabasco on ice cream, and it's weird like that. And he also I forgot where I was going with that now, but he had a lot of weird habits, and he ate garlic like it was apples, and that probably kept him alive as long as it did, because it really helped his blood flow and all of his heart kept his heart working well and so forth. But he would not lose the weight, and he wound up on one of these little carts, electric cart like you get in the grocery store sometimes. And that's the way he got around the house, and he had somebody there that would help him garden and do stuff like that, and help him work with the dogs when he needed to. It was pretty well known that he was not doing well for a while before he went in. So I made it a point of getting by there when I was in Los Angeles, and it was very shortly after that he did pass, and I came back to be sure I was at the funeral. Some of the great things that I remember about him is, how we fought, like we hated each other almost, during production times. And then we go sit in the theater and watch, and listen to the audience around, and lean over and say, "How the devil did we do that?" And I'd say, "I don't remember." And it was that kind of relationship, and hated to see him go. I was always, very sad about that, but I was also really pretty mad with him, because I felt like he could have hung out there for a bunch more years if he had taken care of himself better from the time that I knew him, at least. He did what he wanted to do, and that was not unlike him at all. And his wife had died, probably a year before, and she was a giant post for him to lean on and whatnot. He really missed her, and I think that probably played into it. He had all of his well-known animals cremated, and Higgins was one of them, and so was next Benji. And that was, he had boxes all over the house, from his history and career, and he wanted them to be buried with him when he died, and he was going to be laid to rest at the famous cemetery out there in, I think it's Burbank, one of the biggies, and they would not allow it. They wouldn't allow anything. I don't know what the rule actually was, but they wouldn't allow the cremations of his dogs to be placed in the casket with him. So his bright daughter made a pillow to put in the casket with him. And it was all of those ashes from, or I don't know if it was all of them, but it was, certainly from the most famous ones were in the pillow. He was lowered down, so that was very cool.
I want to be remembered that I led the kind of a life at the end of my life that would turn people to believe in God and to have the hope of life hereafter. I would like for for what I've done to be a signal to somebody. If you're good to animals, they'll be good to you. If you're good to people, they'll be good to you. And it's been proven to me many times.
No, it's always pretty much. There's a couple of pages early in the book where I was dealing with the UCLA thing the first time, because I wanted to go to UCLA right out of high school, and that didn't work. I wanted to go to U. So my dad says, take 2 years, go to Ole Miss, and I had jumped into the middle of a 12-year high school at the 7th grade. So kids that started in the 1st grade were still there, and all, it was like this big mass, non-transient town. And so all the cliques were in and so forth. And, I've never been, I guess I call myself an intro-extro. If you put me in a room where I don't have a clue who the people are, what they're doing, what's going on, I'm the one that's in the corner with my thumb in my mouth. And you put me in front of some people talking about what I know and what I can talk about, you wonder if I'm ever going to shut up. And so it kind of has always worked that way. But I remember being in my closet the day that I found out from my parents that I wasn't going to be making UCLA. And it was probably money. I didn't have sense enough to know it at the time. It's always been expensive. But they had talked me into going to Ole Miss for 2 years. I found a way into my closet and was sitting back in the corner. And through high school, myself and 2 or 3 friends did a bunch of 8mm silent, mostly movies, because at that time there was no recording and no even mag running down the side of a Super 8. The Super 8 wasn't even there when I was doing this. And we did make one that had sound. It's, 8 or 10 minutes long, and the sound was built on just a regular reel-to-reel tape recorder, and it was never in sync with the picture when we would play it and whatnot. But on this day, I'm in the corner, and my shoes. The last picture that we did was down at a creek, and it was all muddy, and I remember the shoes were all muddy, and I was sitting there breaking mud off the shoes and throwing it into the trash can, thinking about all that I wasn't going to have because of not going to UCLA, and bawling my eyes out. So it was early on. And I can't, there are parts of the book, there's stories, parts of the Soul of a Horse, and I know it's true with this one, if I am ever doing talks about it or something, that I won't be able to get through. And I know every time I try to get to 1 or 2 particular instances in the Soul of a Horse, it's, I wind up breaking them. And I finally said, phew, it is what it is.